Hey guys, tonight we're taking a very particular, delightfully peculiar journey back in time. Not to a grand battlefield or a forgotten kingdom, but to the hushed drawing rooms and verdant glass houses of Victorian England. Imagine, if you will, the gentle hiss of gas lamps casting a soft glow on a bustling London street, the clip-clop of horse-drawn carriages, and the faint, earnest murmur of conversations filled with words like progress, morality, and science. This was an age of incredible invention and rigid etiquette, where grand passions often took the most unexpected forms. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes in a Victorian corset, let alone understand half their social customs without causing a polite scandal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's 12:53 p.m. on Sunday, May 18th, 2025 here in Hanoi, and it's always wild to see where everyone's tuning in from as the world spins. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported, not to a sprawling empire, but to a deeply complex society defined by rapid industrialization and equally rapid social change. This is the Victorian era, 1837–1901, named for Queen Victoria, a period that, for all its properness, was bubbling with an almost feverish enthusiasm for discovery, classification, and, perhaps most notably, collecting. It wasn't just about accumulating wealth, it was about accumulating things. Things that reflected the era's twin obsessions, science and status. Imagine the middle and upper classes, burgeoning thanks to the Industrial Revolution, now having a bit more leisure time and a burning desire to display their intellect and refinement. This wasn't the laid-back leisure you might know. It was leisure with a purpose, often a very earnest, almost moral purpose. Collecting became a respectable pastime, a way to engage with the natural world, to categorize its wonders, and to demonstrate one's educated sensibility. You'd see gentlemen and ladies alike, poring over cabinets filled with beetles, or meticulously arranging rows of seashells. It was the original gotta catch 'em all mentality, but with considerably less cartoonish creatures and more delicate taxidermy. This widespread enthusiasm birthed a dizzying array of collecting manias. People collected stamps philately, butterflies lepidoptery, geological specimens, ancient coins, and anything else that could be neatly organized, displayed, and discussed at length during evening soirees. It was a time of immense scientific advancement, and these amateur collections often contributed, in their own small way, to the broader understanding of the natural world. But it also provided a veneer of intellectual engagement that was highly prized in a society obsessed with respectability. A mainstream historical fact is that the Victorian era, 1837–1901, was indeed characterized by widespread public interest in scientific discovery and a strong, almost zealous culture of collecting and amateur natural history pursuits. This period saw the rise of numerous scientific societies and publications catering to this burgeoning enthusiasm among the middle and upper classes. The motivations behind these collecting urges were varied. For some, it was genuine scientific curiosity, a desire to understand the intricate workings of the natural world, to classify and categorize every species. For others, it was a display of social status and wealth. A rare specimen, painstakingly acquired from a distant land, was a testament to one's resources and connections. And for many, it was a form of escapism from the grimy realities of industrial cities, a way to connect with the purity and beauty of nature. It was like bringing a tiny piece of the wilderness into your heavily polluted, gas-lit urban dwelling, just to remind yourself what trees looked like. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine the sheer absurdity of some of the more niche Victorian collecting crazes. Beyond the respectable butterflies, some enthusiasts meticulously collected human hair, arranging it into elaborate wreaths and jewelry. Others collected specific types of pebbles found only on certain beaches, or dust samples from various locales, meticulously labeling each one. You can almost picture a slightly exasperated Victorian wife asking her husband, "Dearest, must you really bring home another bag of unusual dirt from your constitutional—" This intense dedication often verged on obsession, leading to fierce rivalries among collectors and sometimes even unethical practices. The pursuit of a rare specimen could consume fortunes, time, and even reputations. The spirit of the age was one of earnest dedication, whether to the moral uplift of society, the expansion of empire, or the meticulous arrangement of a butterfly collection. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for these Victorian collecting manias was genuine scientific inquiry and the advancement of knowledge, or if the desire for social status and the display of wealth played a more dominant, even subconscious role. Was it truly about understanding nature, or simply about impressing your neighbors with your rare collection of fossilized sea slugs? The answer, like many things in the Victorian era, is likely a complex blend of both, cloaked in a respectable layer of scientific justification. What's undeniable is that this era's unique blend of curiosity, ambition, and social climbing set the stage for one particular obsession that would sweep the nation. One that involved lush green, non-flowering plants. You're ready to discover the peculiar allure of the fern, aren't you? As you let the vibrant, slightly peculiar energy of the Victorian era's age of obsessions gently hum in your mind, shifting from the general mania for collecting? Let's narrow our focus. For amidst the stamps, butterflies, and dusty curios, one particular scientific pursuit blossomed into an absolute national passion: botany. You see, the study of plants didn't just captivate 19th century society, it utterly enchanted it, becoming a respectable, wholesome, and surprisingly widespread endeavor. Imagine yourself strolling through a verdant English countryside, perhaps on a sunny afternoon. You're not looking for rare gems or ancient artifacts. No. Your eyes are keenly scanning the hedgerows, the meadows, the damp crevices of old stone walls. You're looking for plants. Because in Victorian England, collecting and classifying plants was no longer just the domain of a few eccentric naturalists. It had truly become science for all. Why did botany, of all sciences, capture the Victorian imagination with such force? Part of it was its sheer accessibility. Unlike the daunting complexity of astronomy, which required expensive telescopes and mathematical prowess, or the volatile dangers of chemistry, which could result in singed eyebrows or worse, botany could be pursued by virtually anyone. All you needed was a pair of good walking shoes, a sharp eye, a collecting tin, and perhaps a small magnifying glass. No need for a university degree. Nature was your laboratory, and the countryside your specimen cabinet. It was the original low barrier to entry hobby, which, let's be honest, probably frustrated many a professional botanist trying to keep their work exclusive. Beyond accessibility, botany was imbued with immense moral and educational value by the Victorians. It was seen as a wholesome pursuit, one that encouraged fresh air, exercise, and a contemplative appreciation of God's creation. It was considered particularly suitable for women, offering a respectable intellectual outlet that didn't challenge traditional gender roles. A lady could be seen diligently pressing specimens for her herbarium without raising a single eyebrow. It was the perfect hobby: clean, quiet, and you could do it while wearing a rather elaborate hat. This era was also a period of immense scientific advancement and exploration. New plant species were constantly being discovered in exotic, far-flung corners of the British Empire and beyond, brought back by intrepid explorers and colonial administrators. These discoveries fueled a thirst for classification and understanding, feeding the public's fascination. Every new specimen brought back from the jungles of India or the mountains of Africa was a testament to the grand tapestry of life and the triumph of human discovery. A mainstream historical fact is that botany became an exceptionally popular amateur scientific pursuit across various social strata in Victorian England, driven by its relative accessibility, perceived moral and educational value, and the era's widespread fascination with natural history and exploration. This broad appeal contrasts with the more specialized scientific fields of the time. The appeal of botany also offered a vital connection to nature in an increasingly industrialized world. As cities grew grimy with factory smoke and bustling with machines, escaping to the countryside to collect plants offered a restorative balm, a way to remember the beauty and order of the natural world. It was a gentle rebellion against the relentless march of progress, a quiet acknowledgement of the soul's need for greenery. Botanical societies sprung up like wildflowers after a spring rain, organizing excursions, lectures, and specimen exchanges. Imagine groups of earnest gentlemen and ladies, armed with their collecting tins and specimen presses, descending upon a quiet woodland, debating the finer points of leaf venation or the precise classification of a newly found wildflower. It was a delightful blend of outdoor adventure and intellectual camaraderie, sometimes with a side of competitive rivalry. Oh, did you really find a Drosera rotundifolia in that bog? Reginald, are you quite sure it wasn't a Drosera intermedia? Because I checked that bog last Tuesday. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine the length some amateur botanists went to for their collecting excursions. Not everyone lived near pristine wilderness, so urban collectors might journey to surprising places. Some enthusiasts even ventured into the dangerous, often unregulated, world of the docks, hoping to find exotic seeds or specimens that had fallen from cargo ships arriving from distant lands. It's like extreme dumpster diving, but for botanical treasures and with a significantly higher chance of encountering a grumpy dock worker. Historians still argue whether the widespread popularity of botany truly democratized scientific engagement across all social classes, or if it remained largely a pursuit of the leisured middle and upper classes, with the working classes having little time or opportunity for such pastimes. While public lectures and cheap books certainly widened access, the true depth of engagement might have been limited to those with ample free time and resources. This debate highlights the complex social dynamics of Victorian scientific enthusiasm. What's undeniable is that this fervent botanical curiosity laid the perfect groundwork for an obsession that would specifically target one particular, unassuming family of non-flowering plants, transforming them into the unlikely superstars of the Victorian drawing room. You're ready to unravel the peculiar allure of the fern, aren't you? As you consider the widespread fascination with botany that swept through Victorian society, turning every respectable drawing room into a potential herbarium, you might find yourself wondering, why did ferns, of all plants, ignite such an intense, almost feverish passion? It wasn't about showy blossoms or sweet fragrances. No, the allure of the fern was something far more subtle, more mysterious, and deeply rooted in the Victorian sensibility. We're delving into the fern's mystique ancient green charm, exploring why these unique, seedless plants utterly enchanted Victorian minds. Imagine stepping into a cool, damp fern grotto, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and ancient leaves. You see a tapestry of green, delicate, lacy fronds unfurling, robust, leathery ones reaching skyward, and intricate, geometric patterns repeating endlessly. Ferns didn't boast flamboyant flowers or succulent fruits. Their beauty was austere, elegant, and deeply contemplative. This quiet, understated charm was perfectly suited to the Victorian aesthetic, which often valued subtlety and intricacy over overt display. It was like appreciating a beautifully woven tapestry instead of a brightly painted billboard. Part of their irresistible appeal lay in their very mystery and ancientness. Unlike flowering plants that loudly proclaimed their reproductive methods with petals and pollen, ferns reproduced silently, seemingly without seed or flower, via tiny, almost invisible spores. To the Victorian mind, this enigmatic life cycle, so different from the familiar, was utterly captivating. It linked them to a primeval past, a time before flowering plants, a connection to the very dawn of creation. They seemed to whisper secrets of geological time, a living fossil hinting at a world long gone. Imagine trying to explain spore reproduction to a Victorian gentleman who was used to birds and bees. It must have seemed like pure magic. Their geometric beauty and vast variety also played a huge role. From the delicate, lacy fronds of the maidenhair fern to the bold, architectural structure of the hart's tongue fern, every species offered a unique, intricate pattern. Collectors reveled in the endless diversity of shapes, sizes, and textures. This visual richness, combined with their ability to thrive in a range of environments from damp, shady woodlands to sunny, rocky crevices, suggested a remarkable resilience and adaptability. They were survivors, a trait deeply admired by the Victorians. A mainstream historical fact is that ferns held a unique and profound appeal to Victorians due to their mysterious, non-flowering reproductive method spores, their intricate and diverse aesthetic beauty, and their ancient association with untouched, primeval nature. This fascination fueled the phenomenon known as pareidomania. The absence of conspicuous flowers was, perhaps ironically, another source of their charm. In a society that often associated the showy blooms of flowering plants with fleeting beauty, and sometimes even a hint of overt sexuality in their reproductive parts, ferns offered a chaste or pure form of natural beauty. They were dignified, respectable, and quietly elegant, perfectly fitting the moral sensibilities of the Victorian era. You didn't have to worry about your ferns being too scandalous for your drawing room. Ferns also carried a certain romantic symbolism. They were often associated with wildness, solitude, contemplation, and even a touch of melancholy. Collecting them involved venturing into secluded, often damp and shadowy places, ravines, grottos, dense woodlands away from the industrial clamor of cities. This offered an escape, a quiet communion with nature that many Victorians craved. It was like finding a secret, peaceful oasis in the middle of a very noisy, very proper world. For a quirky or fringe tidbit before the scientific understanding of spores was widespread, some early naturalists and popular writers concocted curious theories about fern reproduction. There were whispers of fern seed that could make one invisible if collected at midnight on Midsummer's Eve, harking back to ancient folklore. While most serious botanists knew better, the popular imagination certainly played with the idea of ferns holding magical hidden powers, adding to their mystique. You can almost picture a Victorian gentleman holding a magnifying glass to a frond, muttering, no invisibility here, just a very pretty spore. This blend of scientific enigma, aesthetic appeal, moral suitability, and romantic escapism made ferns the unlikely superstars of the Victorian plant world. They were accessible to study, beautiful to behold, and perfectly aligned with the era's earnest, often understated, appreciation for nature's quiet wonders. They were the perfect plant to get utterly obsessed with. Historians still argue whether the fern's non-flowering nature was truly seen as primarily pure and chaste by Victorians, or if its primary appeal lay in its mystery and otherness that set it apart from more familiar flora. And equally debated is which specific aesthetic quality of ferns, their intricate dissection, their symmetrical unfurling, or their varied textures was most appealing to the diverse tastes of collectors. These questions highlight the complex interplay of cultural values, scientific curiosity, and aesthetic preferences that fueled the fern craze. What's undeniable is that these ancient green plants, with their quiet charm and mysterious ways, had found their moment in the sun, ready to spark a national phenomenon that would soon be known by a very specific, very catchy name. You're ready to see the obsession truly take hold, aren't you? As you immerse yourself in the subtle allure of the fern, understanding its ancient mystique and quiet charm that captivated Victorian minds, you're ready for the moment that fascination tipped over into full-blown obsession. Because what began as a genteel botanical interest rapidly transformed into an undeniable, widespread phenomenon, a veritable national craze with a very particular, very catchy name, pareidomania. Tonight, you'll witness how a fascination with these non-flowering plants became an absolute frond frenzy that exploded across Victorian society. Imagine the mid-19th century, The scientific spirit is soaring, spurred on by groundbreaking discoveries and a thirst for knowledge. Everyone, it seemed, was engaging with natural history, and the fern, with its mysterious reproduction and intricate beauty, was perfectly positioned to become the unlikely superstar. The term pterodomania itself, coined by the clergyman and naturalist Charles Kingsley, perfectly captured the almost irrational zeal with which the British public embraced their leafy obsession. It literally means fern madness, and believe me, it was quite the madness. It's like the Victorian equivalent of everyone suddenly becoming obsessed with collecting obscure types of moss. But, you know, much prettier. This wasn't just a fleeting fad, it was a deeply ingrained cultural movement that permeated all levels of society, from the highest aristocrats to the burgeoning middle class, and even, in some ways, touched the working class. Everyone, it seemed, was suddenly looking for ferns. You'd see gentlemen in their finest coats venturing into damp ravines, ladies in their elaborate skirts carefully navigating muddy riverbanks, all with a single purpose to find, identify, and collect ferns. The competitive aspect was fierce. Finding a rare specimen was a badge of honor, a botanical trophy to be proudly displayed. The drivers of this craze were multifaceted. The inherent accessibility of botany still played a huge role. Ferns were found in every damp corner of the British Isles, requiring no exotic travel initially. More profoundly, the era's escalating scientific discourse, particularly the burgeoning theories of evolution, championed by figures like Charles Darwin, whose Origin of Species would be published in 1859, right at the peak of the craze, made natural history even more compelling. Ferns, as ancient, primitive plants reproducing by spores, offered a direct link to the Earth's primeval past, a living testament to geological time. Collecting them felt like gathering evidence of Earth's deep history. A mainstream historical fact is that the Victorian obsession with ferns, famously termed pterodomania, reached its peak in the mid-19th century, roughly 1840s, 1880s, profoundly impacting domestic design, horticulture, and amateur scientific pursuits across all social strata in Britain. This widespread phenomenon was fueled by a unique blend of scientific curiosity, aesthetic appeal, and social aspiration. Furthermore, pterodomania served as a beautiful counterpoint to the relentless march of industrialization. As Britain's cities grew grimy with factory smoke and its landscapes increasingly scarred by industry, the pursuit of ferns offered a much-needed escape back to the pristine beauty of nature. It was a romantic yearning for wildness amidst the mechanization, a way to bring a piece of unspoiled wilderness into the increasingly artificial urban environment. Imagine a Victorian gentleman, after a long day in a smoky factory, finding solace in meticulously arranging a delicate fern in his Wardian case. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, Charles Kingsley, who coined the term pterodomania in his 1855 book Glaucus, or The Wonders of the Shore, described the craze with a mixture of amusement and concern, even noting that it could lead to unsexing women who ventured into dangerous places to collect. He playfully mused about the dangers of overcollecting, even suggesting that one might mistake a determined fern hunter for a ferocious animal due to their single-mindedness. It's comforting to know that even in the Victorian era, people could jokingly worry about hobbies getting too intense. The display of a grand fern collection, whether in a glass house, a fernery, or meticulously arranged on a table, became a potent social signifier. It demonstrated not only one's leisure time and educated sensibility, but also access to the resources necessary to acquire and maintain these often delicate specimens. It was a subtle, yet powerful, declaration of refinement and good taste. "Oh, do come over, dearest. I've just acquired a particularly rare Adiantum capillus veneris from a secret grotto in Cornwall, and I simply must show it off before Reginald finds one." Historians still argue whether the initial coining of the term pterodomania by Charles Kingsley was intended primarily as a serious scientific observation about a social phenomenon, or if it had a more satirical, cautionary tone, highlighting the potential excesses and absurdities of the craze. Was it a neutral description, or a gentle warning. The nuances of Kingsley's intent are debated, but the term itself stuck, perfectly encapsulating the widespread, almost feverish obsession that gripped the nation. What's undeniable is that by the mid-Victorian era, ferns had ascended to an unprecedented level of popularity. They were no longer just plants, they were symbols of status, objects of scientific inquiry, and a source of profound aesthetic pleasure. This frond frenzy was about to transform not only gardens and drawing rooms, but also entire industries, setting the stage for sometimes perilous adventures in the pursuit of the perfect fern. You're ready to see just how far collectors would go, aren't you? As you continue to feel the exhilarating hum of pterodomania, that full-blown frond frenzy sweeping across Victorian Britain, you might imagine polite gentlemen and ladies simply admiring ferns in their gardens. But beneath the genteel surface of this botanical obsession lay a surprising undercurrent of daring, competition, and sometimes outright recklessness. Because when it came to finding that truly elusive specimen, Victorian collectors went to truly perilous lengths, chasing rare fronds with a passion that often defied common sense. Imagine a scene, not in a manicured park, but on a windswept, misty cliffside along the British coast, or deep within a dark, dripping ravine in the wilder parts of the countryside. You see a figure, perhaps a respectable gentleman in a slightly muddied tweed coat, or a determined lady in practical for the era walking boots, clutching a collecting tin. They're not just admiring the view, they're meticulously scanning every mossy crevice, every damp overhang, every slippery rock face, for a glimpse of that one. Rare fern species. The competitive spirit among collectors was fierce. Finding a new variety, or a particularly rare specimen, was a huge coup, a mark of prestige to be boasted about at botanical society meetings. This drove enthusiasts to venture into increasingly dangerous and remote locales. Ferns, being lovers of damp and shady environments, often thrived in places humans found rather inconvenient on precarious cliff ledges, behind roaring waterfalls, within the darkest recesses of caves, or in the treacherous depths of boggy moors. You can almost feel the chill of the damp air, the slippery texture of moss beneath your fingers, and the distant roar of a waterfall as you imagine their intrepid pursuits. It's like extreme sports, but instead of a snowboard, you have a trowel and a very earnest expression. The physical risks were considerable. Collectors often faced falls from slippery rocks, accidental tumbles into icy streams, getting lost in dense woodlands, or exposure to harsh weather conditions. There are anecdotes, some likely exaggerated for dramatic effect, of collectors needing to be rescued from precarious spots, their passion for a new specimen outweighing any sense of self-preservation. One could almost imagine a Victorian cartoon depicting a gentleman dangling precariously by his umbrella from a cliff, muttering, "Just a little further for the polypodium vulgar." A mainstream historical fact is that the intense competition and zeal of Victorian fern collectors often led them to venture into dangerous and remote natural habitats, sometimes resulting in accidental injury, legal disputes over collection rights, or the stripping of rare species from their native locales due to overcollection. This darker side of pterodomania had real environmental consequences. The impact on wild fern populations was, unfortunately, often severe. The insatiable demand for specimens, particularly for the rarer varieties, led to instances where entire areas were stripped bare. Collectors would literally dig up every single plant of a certain species from a grotto or ravine, taking them for their own collections or to sell to eager nurseries. This practice, often driven by a genuine love of nature, ironically led to the local extinction of many rare fern species in the British Isles. It was like loving something so much you accidentally loved it to death. Sometimes, local guides or professional fern hunters would exploit the craze, leading wealthy collectors to known sites, or even independently stripping areas to sell specimens at inflated prices. This created a peculiar economy around fern hunting, with its own set of rivalries and sometimes unsavory practices. Imagine a local villager trying to charge a baroness an exorbitant sum for a common fern, simply because she wouldn't know the difference. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, there are accounts of collectors becoming so consumed by the hunt that they would neglect their social obligations or even their health. One might hear whispers of a gentleman who skipped a crucial social engagement because he believed a new species of fern might be found in a particular bog after a recent rain, or a lady who developed a chronic cough from spending too much time in damp, chilly ravines, all for the sake of adding another frond to her collection. It's like skipping your family dinner to chase a rare Pokemon. But the Pokemon is a plant, and your family is very, very judgmental. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for these dangerous fern hunting expeditions was purely scientific discovery and the advancement of botanical knowledge, or if the overwhelming drive was more rooted in social prestige. The thrill of competition, or simply the sheer obsession that had gripped so many, was it noble scientific pursuit, or a rather peculiar form of Victorian extreme sport mixed with bragging rights? The truth is likely a complex interplay of all these factors, where a passion for plants met a thirst for recognition. What's undeniable is that the chase for rare fronds pushed Victorian collectors to remarkable and sometimes regrettable extremes. Their zeal, however, was not just about acquiring specimens. It was also, inadvertently, about understanding how to keep these delicate plants alive after they were collected. Setting the stage for one of the era's most ingenious inventions, one that would transform the home into a miniature wilderness. You're ready to discover the solution to their collection conundrum, aren't you? As you recall the sometimes perilous, sometimes regrettable lengths to which Victorian collectors would go in their relentless chase for rare fronds, you might find yourself wondering how did they keep these delicate beauties alive once they were plucked from their damp, wild homes and brought back to the often dry, dusty, and increasingly polluted air of a Victorian city. This was a significant challenge, a botanical conundrum that threatened to dampen even the most fervent pterodomania. The solution, however, was as ingenious as it was simple. A true marvel of observation that utterly transformed indoor gardening the Wardian case. Glasshouses in miniature? Imagine a respected London surgeon and amateur botanist named Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward. It's the 1830s, and he's facing a common problem of the era. The plants in his urban gardens struggle to survive the city's smoky, polluted air. One day, quite by accident, he seals a moth chrysalis inside a glass bottle to observe its metamorphosis. To his surprise, he notices a tiny fern spore, perhaps carried by the wind or a speck of dust, has germinated inside the sealed bottle. And even more astonishingly, the fern thrives, untouched by the toxic urban air. This was Ward's accidental eureka moment. He observed that the plant, sealed inside the glass, created its own miniature ecosystem. Water evaporated from the soil and leaves, condensed on the cooler inner surface of the glass, and then dripped back down, perpetually watering the plant. It was a self-sustaining, humid microclimate, a tiny, perfect world within a bottle. No need for constant watering, no worries about drying out, and crucially, complete protection from the soot, smoke, and drafts of the outside world. It's like finding out your discarded jam jar could actually be a luxurious, self-sufficient botanical spa. Ward, being the astute observer he was, quickly recognized the implications. He developed larger, more practical versions of his accidental discovery glass boxes with wooden bases, often beautifully crafted, that became known as Wardian cases. These weren't just decorative items, they were miniature greenhouses, portable ecosystems designed to protect delicate plants from the rigors of travel and the harsh realities of urban environments. The impact on fern collecting and cultivation was revolutionary. Suddenly, rare and exotic ferns, which had previously withered and died shortly after being removed from their native habitats, could not only survive but actually thrive in Victorian drawing rooms. Imagine the delight of a collector, finally able to display a specimen painstakingly acquired from a distant waterfall, knowing it would remain vibrant and healthy for years. This breakthrough fueled Terradomania even further, making it accessible to those who couldn't venture into dangerous ravines themselves. A mainstream historical fact is that the invention of the Wardian case by Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward in the 1830s fundamentally revolutionized the cultivation and long-distance transport of delicate plants, particularly ferns, by creating a self-sustaining, humid microclimate that protected them from environmental stresses. This innovation was pivotal to the fern craze and the global exchange of plants. But the Wardian case wasn't just for domestic display. Its true world-changing impact lay in its ability to facilitate the long-distance transport of plants. Before the Wardian case, only a fraction of delicate plants survived the arduous sea voyages from distant colonies back to Britain. The changing temperatures, salt spray, and lack of fresh water meant most specimens perished. With the Wardian case, the survival rates soared dramatically. This meant that not only ferns, but tea plants from China, rubber plants from South America, and countless other economically and scientifically valuable flora could be transported across oceans with unprecedented success. It's like upgrading from sending important documents via carrier pigeon to using a super secure, climate-controlled, express delivery service. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine the sheer absurdity of the first attempts to transport delicate plants without the Wardian case. Explorers would try everything, from wrapping roots in damp moss to carrying potted plants on deck, constantly spraying them with fresh water. The failure rate was astronomical, making the successful transport of even a single specimen a miracle. You can almost picture an exasperated botanist on a rocking ship, trying to keep a wilting orchid alive, muttering, "Just 5 more months, little friend. Just 5 more months until you can die in a proper English conservatory." The Wardian case itself became a fashionable status symbol. Wealthy Victorians would commission elaborate, beautifully designed cases, often with intricate metalwork and exotic woods, displaying their prized fern collections in their parlors. It was a statement piece, signaling one's education, refinement, and connection to the scientific marvels of the age. You could almost hear the polite boast at a Victorian tea party. "Oh, is that a Dicksonia antarctica in your new rosewood Wardian case? Miss Davies, how simply delightful." Historians still argue whether the Wardian case contributed more significantly to the safe transport of plants across the globe, thus aiding botanical gardens and economic botany, or to their domestic cultivation and the popularization of indoor gardening in the Victorian era. While both impacts were profound, the exact balance of their influence on the Terradomania craze is a subject of ongoing discussion. What's undeniable is that this unassuming glass box, born from an accidental observation, held the key to unlocking the full potential of the fern craze, allowing it to truly take root in the very homes of Victorian enthusiasts. You're ready to see how this invention transformed their domestic spaces, aren't you? As you marvel at the ingenious simplicity of the Wardian case, that glass house in miniature which finally allowed delicate ferns to survive the rigors of urban life. Prepare now for the leafy explosion that followed. Because the ability to cultivate these mysterious green beauties indoors didn't just add a few potted plants to a corner. It utterly transformed Victorian interior design and gardens, leading to a widespread domestic fern fever where home greenery truly reigned supreme. Imagine stepping into a typical Victorian drawing room in the mid-19th century. Gone are the stark, unadorned spaces of earlier eras. Instead, you're enveloped in a lush, verdant embrace. Ferns were everywhere. You'd see them arranged meticulously on specially designed fern stands, often tiered and elaborate, made of polished wood or ornate cast iron. Delicate fronds would unfurl from elegant ceramic pots on fern tables, sometimes featuring built-in water trays. Hanging baskets, brimming with trailing varieties, would dangle from ceilings, creating a living canopy of green. It was like living inside a very polite, very well-furnished jungle. The sheer ubiquity of ferns in Victorian homes was astounding. They weren't just decorative accents, they became central features, drawing the eye and softening the often heavy, upholstered interiors of the era. The soft, intricate textures of their fronds offered a welcome contrast to the hard lines of furniture and the busy patterns of wallpaper. You can almost feel the damp, cool air around a fern, a stark contrast to the stuffy atmosphere of a gas-lit room, and appreciate the subtle scent of damp earth. For wealthier households, the passion escalated to grander proportions. The glass house or conservatory, once primarily a utilitarian space for growing exotic fruits, it was now often dedicated entirely to ferns. Imagine stepping from a formal dining room directly into a vast, shimmering glass structure, humid and warm, filled with a dizzying array of ferns from every corner of the globe. These were not just greenhouses, they were showcases, living botanical museums, where rare and exotic specimens were lovingly tended and proudly displayed to admiring guests. It was the ultimate display of botanical wealth and dedication. Beyond the glass houses, dedicated ferneries emerged in gardens. These were often outdoor shaded rockeries or grottos, meticulously designed to mimic the natural habitats of ferns, damp, mossy, and cool. Sometimes they incorporated trickling water features or ancient-looking stones, creating miniature wildernesses, perfect for quiet contemplation or a romantic stroll. You might even stumble upon a small, secluded fernery on your afternoon walk through a grand estate, feeling a momentary sense of peace amidst the organized chaos of Victorian life. It's like finding a secret, leafy hideaway, perfect for pondering the mysteries of spore reproduction. A mainstream historical fact is that the widespread availability of the Wardian case, combined with the intense popularity of pterodomania, fundamentally transformed Victorian interior design and garden aesthetics, making ferns ubiquitous in drawing rooms, glass houses, and meticulously crafted outdoor ferneries across all social classes that could afford them. The aesthetic shift was profound. While flowers were still loved, the elegance of the fern offered a different kind of beauty, one that was less fleeting, more structural, and arguably more sophisticated. The preference for lush, intricate green textures over bright, showy blooms in certain contexts reflected a changing taste. The craze often extended to other non-flowering, lower plants like mosses and lichens, cementing a deep appreciation for the subtler forms of botanical life. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine some of the more eccentric furniture pieces designed specifically for ferns. Beyond tiered stands, there were fern-themed fire screens with ferns pressed into glass, fern-patterned wallpaper, and even fern-shaped pottery. Some enthusiasts took it to extremes, creating entire fern rooms where almost every surface, from the mantelpiece to the lampshades, featured a fern motif or a living specimen. You can almost hear a Victorian gentleman proudly exclaiming, "Oh, this is my fern, and this is my fern chair, and this is my fern-patterned teacup. We simply adore ferns in this household, don't we?" Reginald. The accessibility provided by the Wardian case meant that this domestic fern fever wasn't exclusive to the super rich. Middle-class homes could also acquire and maintain smaller Wardian cases or simple potted ferns, making it a widespread cultural phenomenon. It was a tangible way to participate in the scientific and aesthetic trends of the day, a green symbol of refinement that was within reach for many. Historians still argue whether the intense popularity of the fern craze was a genuine, lasting aesthetic shift in Victorian taste, or if it was more of a temporary fashion, albeit a long-lived one, that eventually faded as new trends emerged. And equally debated is its precise influence on later design movements. Did the Victorian love of green textures subtly pave the way for a more minimalist appreciation of foliage? Or was it simply a maximalist phase that eventually exhausted itself? What's undeniable is that for several decades, the frond reigned supreme, turning Victorian homes and gardens into living, breathing tributes to the humble yet captivating fern. You're beginning to see the sheer green scale of this obsession, aren't you? As you let the lush green images of domestic fern fever fill your mind, picturing drawing rooms overflowing with delicate fronds and grand glasshouses dedicated entirely to these botanical wonders, you might find yourself considering the people behind this passion. And specifically, you're ready to explore a particularly fascinating aspect of pterodomania, its profound impact on Victorian women. For fern collecting wasn't just a widespread hobby, it offered a uniquely respectable green pursuit that provided intellectual engagement and a legitimate avenue for scientific contribution in an era of often rigid social constraints. Imagine the expectations placed upon a Victorian lady. Her sphere was typically the home. Her duties focused on managing the household, raising children, and maintaining social graces. Formal scientific education was often limited, and professions in fields like medicine or law were largely closed off. But botany was different. It was deemed a morally uplifting, wholesome, and perfectly appropriate pursuit for women. It combined fresh air, gentle exercise, and an appreciation of God's creation, all without requiring any unseemly exposure to anatomy or the volatile chemicals of a laboratory. You could collect ferns in your Sunday best and still be considered utterly respectable. It's like the Victorian equivalent of a book club, but with significantly more mud and vastly more compelling specimens. This made fern collecting, and natural history in general, an incredibly popular and accessible scientific outlet for women. They could engage with the natural world, classify its wonders, and contribute to scientific knowledge without ever having to step outside the bounds of feminine propriety. You'd find women meticulously pressing specimens for their herbaria, diligently illustrating fern species in detailed drawings, and corresponding with other enthusiasts and even prominent male botanists. This was a rare chance for intellectual stimulation and a sense of purpose beyond the domestic sphere. Many Victorian women became incredibly skilled amateur botanists. They developed keen observational abilities, a deep understanding of fern morphology, and a remarkable knowledge of their local flora. Some even published their own books and articles, often under their own names, contributing significantly to the popular literature of the era. Their work, though often dismissed by later historians as mere amateurism, was crucial in documenting British fern populations and popularizing the craze. A mainstream historical fact is that botany, and particularly fern collecting, was widely promoted and considered a highly suitable scientific pursuit for Victorian women, offering them a legitimate avenue for intellectual engagement and a recognized means of contributing to natural history within the confines of prevailing social norms. Many prominent female naturalists and authors emerged from this environment. For women, the fern craze offered a unique kind of freedom. While they couldn't become professional scientists in the male-dominated university system, they could and did become experts in their chosen botanical niche. Imagine a formidable Victorian lady, perhaps in a sensible walking skirt, fearlessly scaling a damp, mossy bank in pursuit of a rare spleenwort, her collecting tin clutched firmly in hand. This was not merely a passive hobby, it was an active, often adventurous pursuit that challenged the sedentary expectations of female gentility. You can almost hear her polite but firm retort if a gentleman offered unnecessary assistance. "Thank you, sir, but my Asplenium trichomonas awaits no man's clumsy hand." The emphasis on delicate illustration and meticulous classification also played into traditional female accomplishments in art and needlework, allowing for a seamless transition from domestic crafts to scientific endeavor. This blurred the lines between hobby and serious study, creating a respectable pathway for women to engage with the scientific method. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine a Victorian woman attempting to explain the intricate life cycle of a fern, with its alternation of generations, sporophytes, and gamedophytes, to a rather bewildered male relative more accustomed to discussions of stock prices or political affairs. She might have had to simplify it to, "It's magic, dear, just green magic," to avoid causing too much confusion. It's like trying to explain cryptocurrency to your grandmother, but with more Latin names and damp spores. Despite these opportunities, it's important to acknowledge that women still faced significant limitations. Their contributions were often relegated to amateur status, and formal scientific institutions remained largely closed off to them. They were rarely granted the same recognition or professional opportunities as their male counterparts. However, the sheer volume and quality of their work during the Pterodomania era cannot be overstated. Historians still argue whether women's widespread engagement in botany and fern collecting was truly a profoundly empowering movement for women, opening doors to greater intellectual freedom, or if it largely served to reinforce traditional gender roles by channeling their intellectual curiosity into a safe and acceptable pursuit that did not fundamentally challenge the patriarchal structure of Victorian society. Was it a step towards emancipation or a gilded cage? The nuanced answer is still debated, but what's undeniable is that for many Victorian women, the humble fern offered a remarkable pathway to intellectual fulfillment and a rare opportunity to contribute to the grand scientific tapestry of their age. You're beginning to feel the quiet power of these green pursuits, aren't you? As you continue to trace the intellectual journeys of Victorian women through the respectable world of botany and fern collecting, you might be wondering how this quiet pursuit intersected with the era's pervasive obsession with appearances. Well, in Victorian society, even a passion for humble, non-flowering plants could become a powerful tool for social climbing and display. We're now exploring social display status in every frond, uncovering how a grand fern collection subtly, yet powerfully, signaled wealth, leisure, and impeccable taste. Imagine yourself as a guest at a fashionable Victorian soiree. The air might be thick with polite conversation and the gentle clinking of teacups. Your eyes, however, are drawn not just to the elaborate gowns or polished furniture, but to the verdant, almost impossibly lush greenery that seems to spill from every corner. Ferns. They were everywhere, and their presence, their vibrancy, and their sheer quantity were a quiet declaration of the homeowner's position in society. A fern collection wasn't just a hobby, it was an investment. While a small Wardian case might be accessible to the middle class, a truly grand collection, especially one featuring rare and exotic specimens, or better yet, housed in a magnificent conservatory or glasshouse, represented substantial wealth. Imagine the cost of acquiring and maintaining hundreds of delicate plants, often imported from distant corners of the empire, not to mention the expense of building a heated, custom-designed glass structure attached to your home. It was like buying a luxury yacht, but for plants, and without the seasickness. Beyond the sheer financial outlay, a thriving fern collection implied leisure time, time to pursue such a refined hobby, time to meticulously care for the delicate fronds, time to read the numerous botanical tomes. It signaled that you weren't constantly toiling for your living. You had the freedom and resources to engage in pursuits of intellectual and aesthetic refinement. It was a subtle boast. Yes, I have so much free time. I cultivate an entire jungle in my drawing room. Furthermore, a well-curated fern collection demonstrated knowledge and education. To identify, name, and successfully cultivate a diverse array of ferns required a genuine understanding of botany. Being able to discuss the nuances of Asplenium, Adiantum nigrum versus Polypodium vulgar at a dinner party was a sign of intellectual engagement, a mark of a cultivated mind. Imagine the polite horror if someone, after a lengthy explanation of a rare specimen, asked if it was some kind of large moss. Now, the social faux pas would be immense. A mainstream historical fact is that in Victorian society, extensive and meticulously maintained fern collections, particularly those housed in dedicated glasshouses, ferneries, or elaborate Wardian cases, became a significant and highly visible marker of social status, wealth, and refined taste among the burgeoning middle and upper classes. This display was integral to heterodomania. The competitive element, as we've discussed, also played into this social display. Collectors vied to have the most unique, the rarest, or the most perfectly cultivated specimens. Finding a species that no one else in your social circle possessed was a moment of quiet triumph, a botanical mic drop that solidified your standing as a true connoisseur. Imagine the hushed whispers of admiration as guests surveyed a new acquisition. My dear, have you seen the new Cyathea medullaris in the Sinclair's conservatory? It's simply magnificent. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine the lengths some Victorian hosts went to ensure their fern collection was perfectly showcased for social gatherings. There might have been specific lighting arrangements, gas lamps carefully positioned to highlight the fronds, or even subtle misdirections to guide guests towards the particularly rare specimens. One could almost picture a Victorian gentleman, after receiving too many compliments on his common garden ferns, discreetly nudging a guest towards his prized, perfectly cultivated Adiantum capillus veneris, muttering, "Ah, yes, but do look at this little beauty over here. Quite the traveler, you see." Fern collections weren't just static displays, they became a backdrop for social life. Conservatories were often used for afternoon tea, garden parties, or quiet conversations. The lush green environment provided a tranquil, almost exotic setting, allowing guests to admire the botanical wonders while engaging in polite society. It was the perfect blend of nature and nurture, science and social climbing, all neatly encapsulated within the glass walls of a very fashionable greenhouse. Historians still argue whether the fern craze was purely a display of social status and a fashionable affectation, or if it retained a genuine core of scientific enthusiasm and a love for nature among most participants. Was it a superficial trend or a truly widespread intellectual pursuit? The nuanced truth is likely a combination of both. Status and genuine passion often intertwined in Victorian life, with the social display serving as a visible manifestation of an underlying interest. What's undeniable is that every delicate frond, every carefully tended pot, every grand glasshouse whispered tales of wealth, leisure, and a uniquely Victorian form of refinement. You're beginning to see how deeply ingrained this green obsession was, aren't you? As you continue to ponder the subtle power of social display, understanding how every meticulously arranged frond in a Victorian drawing room whispered tales of wealth and refined taste, let's now turn our attention to another powerful force that fueled this leafy obsession, the written word. Because the burgeoning passion for ferns wasn't confined to glasshouses and collecting tins, it exploded onto the pages of books, igniting a veritable publishing boom. Tonight, you'll witness the pages of green passion come alive, as lavishly illustrated fern books flourished across Victorian society. Imagine yourself in a Victorian bookshop, the scent of paper and ink heavy in the air. Amidst the novels and scientific treatises, you'd find an entire section dedicated to ferns. The demand was insatiable. People, from seasoned botanists to enthusiastic amateurs, craved knowledge how to identify new species, where to find them, and, crucially, how to keep them alive in their urban homes. The publishing industry, ever keen to capitalize on a popular trend, responded with a deluge of beautifully produced, often incredibly detailed fern books. It was like the internet, but instead of cat videos, everyone was sharing really intricate drawings of plants. These books weren't just academic tomes. They ranged from comprehensive identification guides to popular natural histories designed for the general reader, and from practical manuals on fern cultivation to magnificent, oversized folios meant for display in the grandest parlors. They democratized botanical knowledge, taking it out of the exclusive realm of scientific societies and making it accessible to anyone with a few shillings and a thirst for green wisdom. You could sit by your fireplace, a warm cup of tea in hand, and embark on a virtual fern hunt, discovering species you might never encounter in the wild. The illustrations in these fern books were a marvel in themselves. Advances in printing technology, particularly lithography and wood engraving, allowed for incredibly detailed and accurate depictions of fern fronds. Some books even featured nature prints, where actual fern fronds were pressed directly onto ink-coated plates, capturing every delicate vein and spore pattern with astonishing precision. Imagine the quiet awe as a Victorian gentleman turned a page to reveal an almost photographic, perfectly preserved image of a rare fern, its intricate beauty captured forever on paper. It was like Instagram for plants, but much more labor-intensive. A mainstream historical fact is that the intense popularity of pterodomania led to a significant boom in botanical publishing during the mid to late 19th century, with numerous lavishly illustrated books and guides dedicated solely to ferns becoming widely available and highly influential in fueling and sustaining the craze. These publications included popular natural histories, identification guides, and practical cultivation manuals. Many of these books were written by, or heavily featured contributions from, the very amateur botanists who were driving the craze, including many of the dedicated women naturalists we discussed earlier. It was a reciprocal relationship. The books fueled the collecting, and the collecting provided new specimens and observations for even more books. This created a virtuous circle of green passion, knowledge sharing, and literary endeavor. You can almost hear the soft rustle of pages being turned, the quiet satisfaction of identifying a newly acquired frond using a trusted guide. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine some of the more unusual or overly enthusiastic titles of these Victorian fern books. Beyond the straightforward British ferns or Ferns of Great Britain, you might stumble upon titles like The Fern World, a Pleasure-Giving and Instructive Guide, or Ferns, British and Foreign, The History, Organography, and Culture of All the Species, with a treatise on the culture of the more exotic. Namaidin. They were essentially the ultimate very long, clickable headlines of their day. Some even contained humorous, albeit unintentional, tips, like advising the reader to cultivate a cheerful disposition alongside their ferns. The commercial success of these fern books was immense. Publishers vied to produce the most beautiful, most comprehensive, and most accessible guides. Authors became minor celebrities within the botanical world, their names associated with particular species or collecting techniques. The profitability of fern books was a clear indicator of just how widespread and passionate pterodomania truly was. It's like a modern bestseller list, but instead of thrillers or self-help, it's dominated by books about leafy green wonders. Historians still argue whether the extensive production and widespread availability of these popular fern books genuinely advanced scientific understanding among amateur botanists, or if they sometimes inadvertently contributed to misidentification due to simplified keys or even further encouraged the overcollection of wild specimens by making rare locations more widely known. Was it a tool for education, or sometimes a guide for unwitting environmental damage? The nuances are debated, but their profound impact on the craze is undeniable. What's certain is that the Victorian passion for ferns found its ultimate expression not just in glass cases and grottos, but in the pages of books. These volumes, filled with intricate illustrations and earnest prose, served as both a record of the era's obsession and a powerful engine that drove it further. Inviting everyone to partake in the green passion, you're beginning to see how deeply this craze permeated every facet of Victorian life. Aren't you? As you flip through the mental pages of those exquisite fern books, witnessing the sheer scale of the publishing boom fueled by green passion, your imagination might lead you to think the fern craze was confined to cultivation and scholarly pursuits. But oh no, dear listener, the frond frenzy permeated far deeper. The aesthetic appeal of these ancient plants was so profound, so utterly captivating to the Victorian eye, that their intricate forms blossomed beyond the glasshouse and onto almost every surface imaginable. Tonight, you'll discover how artistic leaves ferns adorn everything, permeating all aspects of Victorian design. Imagine stepping into a Victorian home, perhaps one not even owned by a dedicated fern collector, but merely by someone with an eye for fashion. You'd find ferns absolutely everywhere. On the walls, wallpaper patterns would repeat delicate frond designs in muted greens and browns. Curtains and upholstery fabric might feature intricate fern motifs woven into their very fibers. The aesthetic wasn't about bold, vibrant flowers. It was about the subtle elegance, the repetitive geometry, and the naturalistic beauty of the fern's intricate structure. It was like living inside a botanical illustration, but in 3 dimensions. This wasn't just limited to soft furnishings. Victorian design embraced the fern and hard materials with equal enthusiasm. Imagine a porcelain teacup with a beautifully rendered fern painted on its surface, or a delicate fern frond etched into a piece of glassware. You'd find them molded onto elaborate ceramic pitchers, embossed on decorative plates, and even incorporated into the very structure of furniture. It was as if every artisan, every designer was suddenly compelled to pay homage to the leafy queen of the plant world. Then there was metalwork. The rise of mass production techniques, particularly for cast iron, meant that fern motifs could be replicated with ease and at scale. Imagine walking through a Victorian garden and seeing elaborate cast iron railings adorned with curling fern fronds, or garden benches with backs shaped like unfurling fiddleheads. Inside the home, lamp stands, fireplace grates, and even door knockers might bear the unmistakable pattern of a fern. It's like finding yourself in a house where every single object has a subtle, leafy, hidden message, whispering, "I love ferns." A mainstream historical fact is that fern motifs became an exceptionally pervasive and distinctive element of Victorian design, adorning everything from wallpaper and textiles to ceramics, glassware, metalwork, architecture, and personal accessories, reflecting the era's widespread fascination with natural history and its aesthetic appeal. This ubiquitous presence solidified the fern's status as a cultural icon. The fern's suitability for design lay in its inherent visual qualities. Its intricate, often symmetrical, and repetitive patterns lent themselves perfectly to ornamentation. They offered a kind of natural elegance that could be both delicate and strong, a versatile motif that worked equally well on a grand architectural frieze or a tiny brooch. And because ferns didn't have showy flowers, their design could be easily stylized or rendered in monochrome, fitting a variety of aesthetic preferences. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine some of the more unusual or humorous Victorian objects adorned with ferns. Beyond the expected, there were even fern-patterned hat pins, elaborately carved fern leaf pipe holders, or, perhaps most delightfully, the trend of placing actual pressed ferns between layers of glass in fire screens or cupboard doors. It's like creating a permanent, heat-resistant botanical display for your drawing room, ensuring your ferns were always the center of attention, even when the fire was roaring. Oh, do admire the particularly crisp outline of that Asplenium trichomanes. Dear, the craze even extended to personal accessories and stationery. Ladies would wear fern-shaped brooches or earrings, sometimes featuring actual pressed and preserved fern fronds encased in glass or resin. Letterheads, greeting cards, and the covers of books especially. Of course, other fern books would be embellished with elegant fern designs. It was a subtle yet pervasive way to declare one's participation in the fashionable botanical trend. You couldn't escape the frond's embrace, even in your correspondence. Historians still argue whether the widespread incorporation of fern motifs into Victorian design was purely an aesthetic choice driven by their natural beauty and versatility, or if it carried deeper symbolic meaning, perhaps reflecting a collective yearning for nature amidst industrialization, or even a subtle commentary on the purity of non-flowering plants. Was it simply a fashionable trend, or did it represent a deeper cultural longing? The precise interplay of aesthetics and symbolism remains debated, but the sheer ubiquity of ferns in Victorian homes and objects is undeniable. What's certain is that the fern transcended its status as a mere plant or scientific specimen. It became an artistic muse, a design icon, its delicate leaves influencing the very visual language of the Victorian era. This widespread demand for all things fern-related also fueled an entirely different kind of boom. One of businesses and specialized vendors eager to capitalize on the public's insatiable green passion. You're ready to see the commercial side of pterodomania, aren't you? As you let the pervasive image of artistic leaves permeate your mind, imagining ferns adorning everything from wallpaper to jewelry, you begin to grasp the sheer scale of this Victorian obsession. And whenever there's an obsession of such magnitude, a market inevitably arises to satisfy its insatiable demands. Because pterodomania wasn't just a hobby, it was a phenomenon that spurred a significant commercial boom, giving rise to a flourishing industry of nurseries and fern dealers. Imagine a bustling Victorian street, perhaps in a less fashionable part of London, but still teeming with activity. Among the various shops, you'd begin to see establishments dedicated solely to plants, and, specifically, to ferns. These were the specialized fern nurseries, enterprises born directly from the craze, Here, row upon row of glass houses would hold a dizzying array of fern species, from common maidenhairs to the most exotic and recently imported varieties. These nurseries developed advanced for the time propagation techniques, tirelessly working to grow enough ferns to meet the surging public demand. It was like a very green, very humid factory, churning out leafy wonders. But the demand for new, rare specimens often outstripped the capabilities of propagation. This led to the emergence of professional fern hunters and dealers. Imagine intrepid or perhaps unscrupulous individuals venturing into the wild, remote corners of Britain, and indeed the wider British Empire, specifically to collect ferns. They would often strip areas bare, digging up entire colonies of rare species to satisfy wealthy collectors or sell to nurseries at inflated prices. These dealers acted as middlemen, connecting the wild source to the Victorian parlor, sometimes making a tidy profit from a very muddy pursuit. You can almost hear the hushed negotiations over a particularly rare frond, its price far exceeding its weight in gold. The Wardian case, our old friend, played a crucial role in this commercialization. Its ability to safely transport delicate plants across vast distances meant that the market wasn't limited to British native ferns. Exotic species from the jungles of India, the mountains of South America, and the far-flung colonies of the empire could now be reliably imported. This influx of new and unusual ferns only intensified the craze, fueling the desire for ever more unique specimens. It was like bringing the entire botanical world to your doorstep, provided you had the cash. A mainstream historical fact is that the intense public demand for ferns during Pterodomania led to the proliferation of specialized fern nurseries and professional fern dealers, creating a significant commercial industry around the collection, cultivation, and sale of fern specimens and related goods, including a thriving import trade for exotic varieties. This commercial boom wasn't limited to the ferns themselves. It spawned entire related industries. Manufacturers of Wardian cases saw a massive increase in demand, leading to the production of cases in every size, shape, and material, from simple wooden models to elaborate, ornate iron and glass structures. There was a market for specialized fern stands, decorative ceramic pots, botanical presses for preserving specimens, and even collecting tools like small trowels and elegant collecting tins. It was a complete ecosystem of commerce, all revolving around the humble fern. It's like the entire economy shifted to supporting a single type of plant, leaving other flora to wonder where they went wrong. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine some of the more eccentric advertising slogans or promotions used by Victorian fern nurseries. Beyond simple listings of species, they might promise specimens to astound your acquaintances, or the cure for urban melancholy, guaranteed to flourish. You can almost picture a particularly ambitious fern dealer setting up a stall at a local fair, promising patrons a genuine fragment of primeval forest in the form of a rare, imported fern. While discreetly wiping mud from his boots, the sheer economic activity generated by Pterodomania was considerable, affecting a wide range of trades and professions, from the actual fern hunters risking life and limb, to the nursery workers tending delicate sprouts, to the artisans crafting glass cases. Thousands of people found employment directly or indirectly from the craze. It truly demonstrated the power of a collective obsession to drive an entire segment of the economy. Of course, this commercial success came with a significant ethical drawback. The relentless demand, particularly for the rarer species, often led to unscrupulous overcollection from wild populations. Delicate ecosystems were damaged, and native fern species that had thrived for millennia in specific locales were sometimes driven to local extinction. The very passion for nature that fueled the craze inadvertently led to its destruction, a tragic irony that historians still grapple with. Historians still argue whether the exact proportion of ferns sold during Pterodomania that were wild collected versus nursery propagated was truly balanced, or if wild collection consistently outstripped sustainable cultivation, especially for desirable rare species. And equally debated are the precise ethical standards, or perhaps more accurately, the lack thereof among commercial fern dealers and collectors of the era, Given the competitive drive for profit and prestige, these questions highlight the complex, often morally ambiguous, reality of unchecked enthusiasm. What's undeniable is that the innocent beauty of the fern had become a commodity, driving a massive commercial machine that would, in turn, contribute to the scientific understanding of these captivating plants. You're ready to see how even this commercial frenzy had its academic benefits, aren't you? As you consider the vast commercial boom that pterodomania ignited, and perhaps a faint whisper of the ethical concerns surrounding overcollection. Let's now balance the scales. For while the craze certainly had its excesses and its less savory sides, it also, quite unexpectedly, yielded genuine and lasting benefits to the world of science. Tonight, you'll learn about the profound scientific gains beyond the mania, uncovering how amateur fern collecting, fueled by passion, remarkably contributed to a deeper botanical understanding. Imagine Victorian England, a nation gripped by fern fever. Thousands of individuals, from enthusiastic amateurs to diligent professionals, were venturing into the countryside, often for the first time, with a keen eye for botanical detail. This wasn't just about accumulating pretty plants for one's parlor. It was about observation, classification, and understanding. And this collective effort, however amateurish it might seem by modern standards, generated an astonishing amount of data. Thousands of collectors meticulously documented the locations, habitats, and variations of fern species across Britain and, through imperial connections, from around the globe. They noted subtleties in frond shape, spore patterns, and growing conditions. This vast, decentralized data collection, often submitted to local botanical societies or exchanged in correspondence, created an unparalleled snapshot of fern distribution and diversity. It was essentially the world's first crowdsourced scientific project, but without the internet and with much more dampness. Crucially, this widespread collecting sometimes led to new discoveries. Amateurs, by sheer volume of observation, occasionally identified previously unrecorded varieties or even, on rare occasions, species that had not been formally classified by professional botanists. Imagine the thrill of a humble schoolteacher in a remote village realizing they had found something truly unique, a variation that had eluded the grand professors in London. That's enough to make you feel like a botanical rock star. A mainstream historical fact is that despite its excesses and sometimes destructive practices, pterodomania significantly contributed to botanical knowledge through extensive amateur data collection, the discovery and documentation of new fern varieties, and a broader public understanding of fern biology and ecology. This widespread engagement inadvertently enriched scientific records. The practice of creating herbarium specimens was also vital. Collectors would carefully press, dry, and mount their collected ferns, often meticulously labeling them with location, date, and collector's name. These personal herbaria, sometimes modest, sometimes immense, became valuable resources. Many were later donated to national botanical gardens and university collections, where they still reside today, providing priceless historical data for modern botanists studying plant distribution and environmental change. It's like building an archive of nature one carefully pressed leaf at a time. The intense focus on ferns also inadvertently helped to advance the scientific understanding of their unique life cycle. The mystery of their reproduction, without seeds or flowers, spurred greater interest in their spores and the complex alternation of generations, where the familiar fern plant is one stage, and a tiny, often unseen gametophyte is another. This popular interest paved the way for more dedicated scientific inquiry into a fundamental aspect of plant biology. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine a fierce, albeit polite, scientific debate among fern enthusiasts during the craze. They might argue passionately about whether a newly found variation was a distinct new species, a mere form of an existing species, or perhaps even a hybrid. These discussions, sometimes quite heated, often led to specific, often humorous, common names for these variations, like the parsley fern or the crispy fern. It's like arguing over the precise classification of a new type of biscuit. But with significantly more Latin and a risk of lifelong botanical enmity, beyond the specific discoveries, Pterodomania played a critical role in popularizing science itself. It brought botanical concepts, taxonomic principles, and the thrill of discovery to a massive public audience, fostering a widespread scientific literacy that might not have occurred otherwise. It made science accessible, engaging, and fashionable, laying groundwork for future scientific endeavors. You could, quite literally, be discussing the intricacies of fern morphology with your neighbor over tea. Historians still argue whether the true scientific value of amateur contributions during Pterodomania genuinely outweighed the professional work of the era, or if amateur efforts were largely derivative of professional discoveries. And equally debated is the precise ethical balance between collecting for scientific documentation and the undeniable environmental impact of widespread overcollection, particularly of rare species. These questions highlight the complex legacy of the craze. A blend of benefit and harm? What's undeniable is that beneath the layers of social display and commercial frenzy, Pterodomania served as a massive, if often undirected, scientific expedition. Thousands of eyes, thousands of hands were scrutinizing the natural world, gathering information that, despite its imperfections, contributed significantly to our understanding of the plant kingdom. The passion, however intense, yielded tangible knowledge, a lasting scientific legacy beyond the mere mania. You're beginning to see the unexpected benefits of this green obsession, aren't you? As you consider the surprising scientific gains that emerged from the fervent, sometimes chaotic, world of Victorian fern collecting, you might be tempted to think that this green obsession would last forever. But like all powerful trends, Pterodomania, for all its intensity, eventually began to wane. Tonight, we'll explore the subtle shift in the cultural currents, witnessing the decline of the craze fading fronds that mark the end of a unique era of botanical passion. Imagine the late Victorian period, perhaps as the 19th century draws to a close and the Edwardian era begins to dawn. The air still hums with progress, but the particular feverish energy that once drove people to scale cliffs for a rare spleenwort has begun to dissipate. The reasons for this decline were multifaceted, a gentle erosion rather than a sudden collapse, but they collectively brought an end to the extraordinary fern madness. One major factor was simply oversaturation. When everyone has a Wardian case in their parlor, and every garden boasts a fernery, the novelty wears off. What was once a unique status symbol, a declaration of refinement and exotic taste, became common. When something becomes too ubiquitous, it loses its exclusive appeal. Imagine if everyone suddenly decided to collect, say, vintage teacups. The thrill would eventually diminish once every house had a cupboard full. It's like a hit song that's played so often you just want it to, politely, go away. Then there was the growing, or perhaps more accurately, diminishing environmental impact. The relentless overcollection of ferns from the wild had taken its toll. Rare species became genuinely rare, some even locally extinct. While not a fully developed environmental movement, a growing awareness of the depletion, or simply the visual scarcity of wild ferns in once bountiful locales, might have cast a subtle pall over the craze. It's hard to be passionate about collecting something if there's nothing left to find. A mainstream historical fact is that Pterodomania, while intense, eventually declined in the late Victorian and early Edwardian periods, influenced by factors such as oversaturation of the market, changing aesthetic tastes, concerns about the environmental impact of overcollection, and the emergence of new scientific and recreational pursuits. Changing aesthetic tastes also played a significant role. Victorian design, once characterized by its busy, often floral or fern-laden patterns, began to shift. New movements like the aesthetic movement and later Art Nouveau emerged, bringing different botanical interests like the elegant, exotic orchid or stylized abstract forms and new design principles that moved away from the literal naturalism of the fern craze. Fashion is fickle. Even for plants, you can almost feel the collective sigh of relief as designers moved on from endlessly repeating frond patterns. Furthermore, maintaining large fern collections, especially the grand glasshouses and ferneries, was incredibly labor-intensive. As the initial zeal faded, the continuous watering, trimming, and pest control required might have become a burden rather than a joy. The magic of the Wardian case, while revolutionary, still required attention. Imagine the chore of dusting hundreds of delicate fronds in a smoky Victorian home, enough to make anyone reconsider their hobby. The very scientific advancement that initially fueled the craze also subtly contributed to its decline. As more was understood about fern reproduction, and their mysterious spore-based life cycle became less of an enigma, some of the initial mystery and ancient charm that had so captivated the Victorians began to fade. The unknown became known, and familiarity, as they say, breeds contentment, but perhaps not obsession. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine the slightly awkward social moments as the craze began to wane. You might attend a tea party where a proud host still enthusiastically points out their extensive fern collection, only to be met with polite but distinctly unenthusiastic murmurs. Meanwhile, other guests are discreetly discussing the latest orchid species or the novel challenges of cultivating alpine plants. It's like proudly showing off your extensive VHS collection at a party when everyone else has moved on to streaming services. Oh, how, quaint, Reginald. Finally, the relentless march of progress itself played a part. New inventions, new forms of entertainment, and other leisure pursuits emerged, capturing the public's attention. The bicycle, photography, and the burgeoning interest in sports offered new ways to spend leisure time and display one's modernity. The quiet, contemplative world of the fern slowly lost its grip on the popular imagination, replaced by more active or technologically advanced hobbies. Historians still argue whether the primary factor in pterodomania's decline was predominantly a shift in fashion and aesthetic tastes, or if the growing, albeit nascent, environmental awareness of overcollection played a more significant role in dampening enthusiasm. And equally debated is whether the craze truly ended, or if it merely transformed into a more subdued, less manicured horticultural interest, evolving rather than disappearing entirely. The truth is likely a gentle mix of influences, a slow fading of the green light. What's undeniable is that the intense passion for ferns, like a delicate frond in a changing season, eventually wilted, leaving behind a curious legacy that still echoes in our appreciation for nature's quiet beauty. You're ready to explore those lasting echoes, aren't you? As you gently observe the fading fronds that marked the polite decline of pterodomania, you might assume that this peculiar Victorian obsession simply vanished without a trace, a mere historical curiosity. But that would be underestimating the quiet power of its influence. For even as the fervor cooled, the fern craze left an indelible mark, shaping the very landscape of our relationship with plants and horticulture. Tonight, we'll reflect on its green legacy enduring horticultural echoes, uncovering how pterodomania subtly, yet profoundly, impacted plant collecting and conservation for generations to come. Imagine today, walking through a modern botanical garden or even a well-stocked plant nursery. You'll see thriving ferns, often in beautifully designed displays. Many of the horticultural practices and technologies we take for granted, particularly those related to cultivating delicate or exotic plants indoors, owe a debt to the Victorian fern craze. The Wardian case, our revolutionary little glass box, didn't just fade into obscurity. Its principles continued to inform the design of glasshouses and conservatories, leading to the magnificent structures that grace public gardens and private estates worldwide. They became cathedrals of glass and greenery, a direct architectural legacy of pterodomania. It's like finding out your favorite plant store is actually a direct descendant of a Victorian obsession. The intense focus on ferns pushed the boundaries of horticultural knowledge. Victorians learned an immense amount about humidity, propagation, and the specific needs of various plant species. This accumulated wisdom, born from thousands of eager amateur experiments and countless accidental plant deaths, contributed significantly to the science of horticulture. The vast number of fern books published during the craze, now collectors' items themselves, remain valuable historical documents of botanical understanding, preserving detailed illustrations and observations from an era of fervent discovery. A mainstream historical fact is that despite its eventual decline and some negative ecological impacts from overcollection, Pterodomania significantly advanced horticultural practices, popularized indoor gardening, and fostered a lasting public appreciation for botany and natural history, leaving an enduring legacy in plant cultivation and display. Beyond the technical advancements, Pterodomania also fostered a broad public appreciation for botany and natural history that laid crucial groundwork for future scientific engagement. It democratized access to the natural world, showing that scientific pursuit wasn't just for dusty professors, but for anyone with a keen eye and a curious mind. This widespread interest subtly influenced the development of conservation movements later on. As people became more aware of the fragility of wild populations, sometimes due to the very damage caused by overcollection. It's like accidentally breaking something beautiful and then realizing you really want to protect what's left. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine a very particular fern, the maidenhair spleenwort Asplenium adiantum nigrum, which was so popular during the craze that it became almost impossible to find in the wild in some areas due to overcollection. Fast forward to today, and dedicated botanists are still working to reintroduce it into its native habitats, almost as if it's the botanical equivalent of bringing back a long-lost pop star. It's a strange irony that a plant so loved might need human intervention to survive after being too loved. The hobby of plant collecting itself evolved. While the extreme zeal of Pterodomania faded, the underlying interest in botanical exploration continued, but often with more nuanced ethical considerations. Modern plant collecting is generally far more regulated, with a greater emphasis on sustainability, scientific research, and conservation rather than mere acquisition for display. The initial wild frenzy taught some hard lessons about environmental impact, subtly sowing the seeds of modern ecological consciousness. Even today, the aesthetic influence of ferns persists. You'll still find fern motifs in contemporary design, on fabrics, pottery, and in garden layouts. Their timeless elegance and intricate patterns continue to appeal, a quiet echo of their Victorian heyday, and those charming little Wardian cases, once a symbol of a national craze, are now beloved terrariums and miniature greenhouses, allowing us to bring a touch of that ancient green magic into our homes, just as the Victorians did. Historians still argue whether the environmental damage caused by Pterodomania through overcollection was truly outweighed by its positive scientific and horticultural legacies, or if the craze inadvertently sparked early environmental consciousness primarily because of the visible depletion it caused. The exact balance of positive versus negative impact and the direct versus indirect influences remain a subject of nuanced historical debate. What's undeniable is that the Victorian passion for ferns, like a spore carried on the wind, settled into the fertile ground of our collective knowledge, leaving behind a lasting green legacy that continues to shape our understanding and appreciation of the plant kingdom. Even long after the madness has faded, you're beginning to see the deep, quiet roots of even the most peculiar historical obsessions. Aren't you? Now, as the last delicate fronds of Victorian obsession gently recede from your mind, allow yourself to simply be. The journey has been long, stretching from gaslit parlors to the quiet ecosystems of today. Feel the gentle lull of the evening, the peaceful stillness that settles around you, drawing you into a state of deep calm. The tales of passionate collectors, ingenious glass boxes, and the enduring charm of the fern have woven themselves into the fabric of your imagination, a warm blanket of history. Let the intricate details we explored tonight melt away, leaving only a sense of profound appreciation for the subtle, yet powerful connections that link us to the past and to the quiet beauty of the natural world. Your mind is now free to wander, soft and unfettered, as you drift effortlessly towards the softest sleep. Release any lingering thoughts. Let your breath grow slow and even, and allow the gentle hum of the night to carry you into the deepest, most restorative rest. All is well, all is quiet, and the whispers of green legacy are gently fading into your dreams. Sweet dreams.